speak on this bill. I spoke on this reading of it. I acknowledge then Simon Bridges' work and do so again, and also the government for picking this bill up. And I quite genuinely want to recognise the fact that there have been resources put into this area, because despite what the MP for Coromandel said, in earlier comments by this side of the House, the comments were around the fact that while people were pleased to see the changes being put forward, they were worried that without additional resourcing this was going to be window dressing. Now, the government has come to the party and put in some additional resourcing over the next 4 years for animal welfare and law enforcement, and so I acknowledge that and say that that is certainly an improvement. I want to acknowledge the people who submitted on this bill, and I note quite a small number of submissions actually, 17, but I'm going to assume, and I think with some good grounds, that that is probably because there was general support in the community for what was contained in this Animal Welfare Amendment Bill. But I do acknowledge those people who took the time, and I think that, of course, as we too from time to time recognise our select committee process in New Zealand is a very good process. It is an opportunity to improve legislation, and in fact, of course, the Select Committee has made a number of recommendations coming back from the Primary Production Select Committee which do improve this bill further, and three main areas: disqualifying people from ownership as well as custody of animals, increasing penalties for contravention of the disqualification order, and the ability to forfeiture animals. So those are some additional improvements. Now, I think that when I spoke on the first reading, I talked about the important role that animals play in our lives, and people have categorised that as domestically, as domestic animals or as farm animals. And I want to acknowledge the contribution of Sue Kedgley and her ongoing work in this area. I think it's critically important that as a country that makes so much of our foreign earnings from animals and from primary production, that we are always vigilant and that we do assess whether or not the farming techniques in this country and other animal handling techniques are in fact satisfactory. We should be, as my colleague Damien O'Connor said in his contribution, we should be aiming to be the best in the world. And in fact it is expected from New Zealand. And I was fortunate enough prior to coming to Parliament to be a member of the Food and Beverage Task Force that the previous government set up, and we looked at the important role that food and beverage played for the New Zealand economy, and the requirements that in fact customers globally were putting on countries like New Zealand, both the supermarket chains, which are very, very powerful corporate bodies indeed, but also individual customers in the countries that we export to. And we were given the example of the requirements of Japanese customers, for example, and they wanted to know that our lambs were happily growing up in nice paddocks in New Zealand, and that they could be traced from birth until they got onto their plate in Japan, and everything that happened in between. Now that may sound, a strange thing for them to be doing, but that was the requirements they had, and all along that chain people wanted to know that the animal welfare elements were treated properly, and indeed other requirements on us as a country. So there are economic reasons, as well as the fact that it is the right thing to do, that we should be concerned about the treatment of our farm animals as well as domestic animals. I gave many examples of the role that domestic animals play in our lives, not just as pets, but in fact in a whole range of circumstances, in health, in therapeutic situations. And I was hearing recently that there is now programs in prisons around prisoners dealing with animals as well. And humans have a particularly strong emotional response, many humans, to animals. Now, of course, the people who abuse and mistreat animals are committing a crime of violence, just like abusing and ill-treating another person. And they often are, in fact, along the same spectrum. So children who abuse animals often go on to abuse other humans.
I call Sue Kedgley.